So, a little background information. William Randolph Hearst, he was born in 1863. Modern extension work, and we won't be discussing every ceiling in every room, but I recommend looking up at all of them. They are all quite remarkable, and we will talk about the ceiling again in just a couple of minutes. But there are about 20,000 art objects here on the hilltop, which accounts for approximately maybe 10% of his entire collection. He had 5 other palatial estates, 4 of them around the country. He owned a 12th century castle in Wales called St. Donat's, which he had to get rid of in the late 1930s because he was at that point very much in debt, and he was spending about $340,000 a month just in the upkeep costs of that one property. Now that's a figure that makes my head spin by today's standards. We're talking about 1930s dollars here. He collected a lot of paintings, loved paintings. This is the rarest painting in his entire collection. So you'll start to get an idea of Mr. Hearst's collecting habits as we start walking through these rooms. He became a voracious collector of art, antiques, and antiquities, especially in his later life. And this was all really fostered by his mom, Phoebe Apperson Hearst. His mother was a philanthropist. She was a school teacher. She was very instrumental in creating what we know in this country as the Parent-Teacher Association. So education was of the utmost importance to her. And she devoted much of her life to see that her young son had an appreciation for history and the arts. So much so that in 1873, when Mr. Hearst was just 10 years old, she took him on an 18-month grand tour of Europe. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been on an 18-month vacation before. This is where he first laid his eyes on castles and palaces and royal gardens, and he fell in love with medieval architecture. And it's from the inspiration he gained on that first trip as a young boy that inspired everything that we see here today. And his mom was also very influential in modeling for him very important contributions that women were making. And then it has modern extension work, which means that the room wasn't built to fit the ceiling was modified to fit the room. And this is an example of something you see everywhere you look here in the house. You just don't know you're looking at it, which is a real testament to the craftsmanship of the artisans that were hired up here by architect Julie Morgan. You can't quite tell where the antique stops and the modern work begins. Now another example. A cloister is an area, in this case it's a sleeping area, that enters out into an open air walkway. So this was all originally open. But here on the central coast of California, we have these very severe weather conditions, uncomfortable to sleep here. So his first solution was to install storm shutters. You can still see brass brackets on the walls from now. That was by design so that the water would be able to run off. And if you want to poke your head. So these bedrooms were used by people who were related to one another or traveling companions, actor Cary Grant. So the library, yes. According to book collector and author A. Edward Newton, he roamed around the mansion until he found the one room he was looking for, and that was the library. He described it as a noble room with many books, not necessarily collector's books, but the types of books you'd expect to find in the home. There are over 4,000 volumes of books on the shelves here. They range in subjects, politics, science, gardening, a lot of reference books, a lot of classics on the shelves, William Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, Washington Irving. There's a signed copy of Mark Twain somewhere. Mark Twain, who's a classic today, was actually a writer for Mr. Hearst newspapers. But the oldest set of books is an 8. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I have to look. I have to double check them all. But that's a good question. I can find out at the end. So, this was his private room. Now, if I start throwing out a bunch of numbers and timelines and it starts to get a little confusing when he was here, when he wasn't. Generally speaking, he was usually staying here about 6 months out of the year. Remember, he had a lot of other houses around. He was entertaining here usually during the summer months. And he and his wife separated in the mid-1920s. And then he moved up here to this suite with his girlfriend in 1927. And they stayed up here for over a decade. This was his private room. There are a lot of photos and portraits and things of his family on the walls here. You got a portrait of his mom, Phoebe, on this side. You have a full-length photograph of his mom here on this side. Woman. His wife was, her name was Millicent. She was a vaudeville dancing girl from New York. Marion Davies was a Broadway dancing girl from New York. Mr. Hearst was, in those days, known as a stage door Johnny. He would wait by the stage door while the dancing girls would come off stage, and he would attempt to woo them and shower them with gifts and get their attention and win their favor. Well, he did. He got the attention of Marion Davies. Now, his wealth fluctuated a lot throughout his life. It could be said that he was always land and asset rich, but often cash poor. In the late 1930s, he was about $87 million in debt. There were a lot of anti-Hearst boycotts and protests going on around the country, plus this was during the Great Depression era, so he was facing financial ruin. His girlfriend, Marion Davies, she was successful in her own right. So we saw the public library on the second floor. This is the private library on the third floor. This was by far the most exclusive room in the entire house. It was always under lock and key. Very few amount of people were ever allowed to be up there. Even William Randolph Hearst's own children would have to call up and get permission first. Now, I mentioned that he was not just entertaining here, he was working from this house. He was a multimedia mogul. He ran over 90 businesses from this estate. So people like Rupert Murdoch, Ted Turner, Oprah Winfrey, Mark Zuckerberg. William Randolph Hearst was the first. You know, radio stations, newspaper plant underground. You won't see any telephone poles or wires anywhere you look up here. So pretty innovative, unparalleled innovation for the time period as well. He never referred to this as a castle. He only referred to this place as the Ranch at San Simeon. He referred to it as a castle once in a poem that he wrote. But he wrote to Julie Morgan once a letter, and he said, I don't see why San Simeon should not be a museum of the finest. So this is the open cloisters. The other side was the walled off, the windowed off. So this was kept left alone. You can see the teak wood cornice that hangs above the house. Teak wood was imported from Thailand. The cornice was carved by an artist by the name of Jules Supo in a San Francisco workshop. And you can see very clearly his wonderful view of the Santa Lucia, the two Della Robbia tomboes that are built into the wall here. Luca Della Robbia was an Italian sculptor and an artist, and his family lasted generations during the time of the Renaissance. They invented glazing techniques for ceramics that was very durable and shiny. When working with Mr. Hearst over the course of 28 years, the architect Julie Morgan had one major frustration with him. It was his constant changeableness of mind. It was not at all uncommon for Mr. Hearst to decide he wanted something to look differently or altered once it was already constructed. They'd have to tear it down and start over. École des Beaux-Arts, School of Fine Arts in Paris. She wasn't admitted until the third attempt. She was first woman to get admitted, first woman to graduate from the architecture program there. She taught herself how to speak French, she taught herself the metric system, and she ultimately completed a 6-year program in just 3 years because she had to. At that school, at that time, you couldn't study there past the age of 30 years old. She didn't get into the program until she was 27. So she only had 3 years, and she did it. And then she returns here to California where she starts getting work as an architect. But she wasn't getting paid nearly enough money. So she started her own architectural firm in San Francisco. She was the first of the projects while she was working on this one. She wasn't just the architect. She was in charge of interior design, landscaping of the gardens, hiring of the employees, the payroll, the welfare of the zoo animals. So she stood at 4'11", but she had an iron will and an unyielding commitment to see that this project succeeded. And had it not been for Julie Morgan, most likely would not have.